Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to today's webinar on assessing vulnerabilities and identifying adaptation options, gender equality in National Adaptation Plan processes or NAP processes. My name is Daniel Morchain, and I am a Senior Policy Advisor and Gender Equality Co-Lead of the NAP Global Network Secretariat, which is hosted by the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I sincerely apologize. I will have just turned on my camera. Sorry for that. We are happy to organize this webinar in collaboration with the Adaptation Committee and the Least Developed Countries Expert Group, the LEG, under the UNFCCC. We have planned a very interactive process for this webinar, and we are looking forward to your active participation. If you have questions during the session, please enter them in the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer them, either during the webinar or as a follow-up. A quick note that you will see the Q&A button and the chat button. Maybe you are more familiar in the typical Zoom meetings with the chat button, but here for any question that you'd like to pose, please use the Q&A button, okay? Rest assured, we have the slides and links in our website by the end of the week, so they will be accessible to you. All right. The NAP Global Network is an initiative that works to enhance national adaptation planning and action in developing countries and helps accelerate adaptation efforts around the world. The network connects over 1,300 individual participants from more than 150 countries and has delivered direct technical support to 42 countries already. Funding for the NAP-GN has been provided by the governments of Germany, the United States, Canada, and Austria. Next slide, please. So we would like to start the session with opening remarks from our partner. I'd like to introduce Ms. Mary Yao of Togo and the Least Developed Country Expert Group, or the LEG, under the UNFCCC. Mary, over to you, and thanks very much already.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for giving me the floor. I would like to thank everyone, all participants for joining us. And thank the Secretariat also for providing me the opportunity to provide remarks at this important webinar on behalf of the Least Developed Country Group, Expert Group. Firstly, we are delighted about this continued collaboration between the Adaptation Committee and the LEG and the NAP Global Network in leading the way to ensure gender-responsive approaches in the process to formulate and implement national adaptation plans. Together, we ensure that this important topic keeps traction in the climate change process and that countries are equipped with tools and technical assistance on how best to involve women and men equally in the development and implementation of national climate policies and more specifically, national adaptation plans. This is particularly important against the backdrop of the global COVID-19 pandemic, while everyone is facing unprecedented challenges, women are bearing the brunt of the economic and social fallout of COVID-19. For countless women in economies of every size, along with losing income and pay, care and domestic work burden has exploded. Now is the time to go beyond policy commitments of ensuring a gender-sensitive approach to adaptation and instead look at how it can be done in practice. We had planned to launch a set of activities at the NAP Expo this year to assist countries in applying a gender toolkit, but we had to redesign plans as with everything else. This webinar is therefore an important event to maintain the significance of advancing gender in national adaptation plans, especially now that many countries are actively formulating their first NAP. The leg continues to explore what more can be done to enhance gender considerations and to join forces to fostering stakeholder collaboration. I am looking forward to an engaging and interactive webinar. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
And thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for bringing up those very important points, which we take as a framing of the events. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to, thank you. So I'd like to get us started with a brief introduction of what we mean by a gender responsive NAP process and why it is important, because we recognize that you've heard about it most likely times, but what does it mean? That's what we'd like to get into now. Okay. So the rationale for a gender responsive approach is quite strong. And there is, you know, that's not what we are challenging here at all. So we want to go and explain what it is about. So first, gender equality is a universal human right, which is enshrined in a number of international agreements, including the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's also at the center of Sustainable Development Goals, with SDG number 5 focusing on ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls and ensuring women's full and effective participation and leadership at all levels of decision making, among other targets. So we have those clear guidelines there. Second, there are a number of decisions under the UNFCCC, including in the Paris Agreement, which call for the climate action to be gender responsive. More recently, at COP25 in Madrid, parties agreed the enhanced Lima Work Program on gender and a gender action plan, building on the first iterations established in 2014 and in 2017, respectively. At the same time, we know that adaptation will not be effective if it doesn't take gender into consideration, and there's huge evidence, of course, to back that up. The latest reports from the IPCC note the potential for adaptation investments to inadvertently increase gender and social inequalities and reinforce existing vulnerabilities if they don't take gender into consideration. Right? In our work on gender responsive NAP processes, we have realized that there is a lack of a common understanding of what gender responsive adaptation involves. So we developed a simple framework which we can apply when thinking about building climate and disaster resilience. So let me take you quickly through these three elements. The first one is recognizing that there are gender differences in needs and capacities for adaptation, okay? This is about understanding and addressing the differing adaptation needs and capacities of people of all genders and social groups. So really understanding these specifics, these nuances. The second element is around gender equitable participation. And basically, it's about ensuring that all stakeholders have a say in planning and decision-making through inclusive and participatory processes. And the third one is consideration of who is benefiting from investments in recovery and resilience building to ensure that there are equitable benefits for people of all genders and social groups. So really understanding, you know, what is behind the action itself and who is benefiting from it and who should be benefiting, who can be benefiting from that. So that's a quick summary of that. And what we would like to do now is not have you go through just hearing and listening to me, but we've been aiming to bring you more voices into this session and to do so through a video. So we've invited some of our colleagues, some of our partners, some of whom may be sitting right here and watching this presentation, to share their perspectives on a few key questions related to gender and NAP processes. You're very welcome to make comments on the chat box now, because it's not a Q&A, but more a chat. If you want to respond to the video, feel free to do that. We're gonna watch the video now and hope you enjoy it.
In Jamaica, the biggest challenge may relate to understanding the nexus between adaptation and gender by actors at the household, community, parish, and national levels.
Well, in my country, I basically think that, of course, we have a lot of men that are participating in decision making when it comes to the national adaptation process. But we still are lagging behind when it comes to women participation in policy. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we are having, whereby we get to find more women that are on the ground implementing the projects. But when it comes to policy and decision making, we do not have a lot of women that are contributing to policy.
Dans mon pays, je crois que le plus grand défi à relever pour la planification de l'adaptation sensible au genre est l'accès équitable à l'information pour les hommes et les femmes et la participation également équitable des hommes et des femmes au processus de planification de l'adaptation au changement climatique.
So in Ghana, I think there are quite a number of challenges when it comes to NAP and gender issues. And I'll focus on budgets as one of the key challenges that the country faces. There has been quite a number of instances where other things have been talked about in plans and in policies, but they never see implementation because they haven't been allocated budgets for these issues. And so budget allocation is one of the key things that is confronting a gender-responsive NAP process in the country.
My response is low capacity of technical officers to mainstream gender and adaptation into national development planning processes, especially at the district or local level. Many technical officers do not have the requisite knowledge on how to mainstream gender and adaptation into planning. The few who do are sometimes transferred as short notices to other districts, and this truncates the efforts at gender-responsive NAP processes, where knowledge transfer has not been ensured.
The challenge of engaging in top-down management of adaptation planning processes also means that the kind of data and information to inform our understanding of gender-responsive adaptation options is limited. This in turn leads to spotty incorporation of gender dimensions in adaptation planning.
As gender inequality persists worldwide, so it's very important that we address gender responsive and gender equality issues within the climate change actions in a meaningful way.
In this case, I'll still focus on the budget issue. So once this has been identified as a challenge, it's important to address this as one of the key needs to make a change. So if we really want to make a change as a country, then we have to make dedicated allocations for gender-responsive adaptation planning in the country.
The most important change needed is having a robust data and monitoring and evaluation system that will allow us to capture the gender dynamics that influence how we identify and implement adaptation options. This will be the NAP that we are in the early stages of developing.
So it's very imperative that we create agencies for the women to reclaim their rights and to enjoy all the benefits from the government. And equally, we also think about to develop adequate roles and pathways for women and allocate adequate budget within the local government system, particularly within the municipalities.
Among the most urgent changes needed to facilitate gender-responsive NAP in Antigua and Barbuda are the need for the application of gender-specific empirical data to inform planning across all critical sectors. There's also a need for education around the meaning of gender and what the implications of gender-responsive planning are at the broader societal level.
The NAP process in my country would be more gender responsive if we address the information and data gaps to help decision makers involved in the national adaptation planning process.
Le processus PNA dans mon pays serait plus sensible aux genres si toutes les femmes et les hommes ont un accès équitable à l'information et participent de manière équitable aux concertations et à la planification et au choix des options d'adaptation, et également si la budgétisation des actions d'adaptation tenait compte des besoins spécifiques des femmes et des hommes. Je crois que l'adaptation, le processus d'adaptation serait sensible aux gens.
The NAP process in my country would be more gender responsive if budgetary allocations are assigned for the actions and then the activities that are done, in that you can have all the plans and then the policies nicely done. If monies are not assigned for implementation, no results will be achieved in that sense.
The NAP process in Antigua and Barbuda would be truly gender responsive if, one, it allowed equal opportunity for the participation of men and women in all areas of planning and implementation. If, two, there was a recognition of the gender dimensions of all activities in these critical sectors, so that we understand how men and women impact and are impacted by actions in these sectors.
The NAP process in my country would be more gender responsive if planners and stakeholders at all levels had access to more complete data and information on gender dimensions of adaptation and a better understanding of how to integrate that information into adaptation planning.
The NAP process in my country would be more gender responsive if capacity is built and sustained within institutions and not centered around individuals who do not ensure knowledge transfer and sustainability of gender responsive NAP efforts within their respective institutions.
The NAP process in my country would be more gender responsive if state and non-state actors across all the various sectors recognized the value of gender in adaptation initiatives present and in the future.
Then finally, I think the NAP process in my country will be more gender responsive if we can mainstream the gender action plan in all our national processes, in all our national plans, in our national commitments. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you very much to all partners, colleagues, friends who contributed to this video. We hope you found it insightful. And as a reminder, it will be available with the rest of the material of this discussed in this webinar by the end of the week in the NAP Global Network website. Okay, now I'd like to introduce my colleague Angie Dassé, a Senior Policy Advisor and Gender Equality Lead with the Resilience Program of the NAP Global Network, who will lead us through the interactive component of the session. So over to you, Angie.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So to start off this interactive component, I'm going to provide just a very brief introduction to the toolkit for a gender responsive process to formulate and implement NAPs. As previously mentioned, this resource was developed by the NAP Global Network in collaboration with the Adaptation Committee and the LEG under the UNFCCC. And we launched it at COP25 in Madrid. The purpose of the toolkit is to support country efforts to pursue a gender responsive NAP process. The main target audience is government actors coordinating the NAP process, but it will also be useful for stakeholders and for development partners supporting adaptation planning and implementation. We recognize that there are already a considerable number of tools and guidance documents out there to guide gender mainstreaming. So our aim was really not to reinvent the wheel, but rather to provide something specific to the NAP process. And we also wanted something very practical to help countries to identify the best tools and resources for integrating gender considerations at different points in the NAP process. It is centered around a set of gender responsive principles, and it offers guidance on taking a gender responsive approach in the key steps and enabling activities of the process. It also provides tools, practical examples, and links to useful resources for a gender responsive approach. This is an overview of the content that follows the introduction to the toolkit, so you can see how the document is organized. It's designed as a very flexible resource. Links are provided throughout to allow for easy navigation between the different sections. We've also included a large number of hyperlinks to external resource documents. And as mentioned, there are practice examples throughout that put the guidance into context. Regardless of where a country is in its NAP process, there are opportunities to integrate gender considerations. The toolkit is organized around key entry points where gender responsive approaches can be applied. These align with the steps in the UNFCCC technical guidelines for the NAP process, which many people will be familiar with. It's important to note that we don't cover all of the steps in the technical guidelines. We've focused on the ones that are most strategic when it comes to integrating gender considerations. Alongside the key steps in the NAP process, there are ongoing activities that facilitate progress and increase effectiveness. These enabling activities include the establishment of institutional arrangements, stakeholder engagement, capacity development, information sharing, and securing finance for the NAP process. As they present important opportunities to integrate gender responsive approaches, we have also included guidance on these enabling activities in the toolkit. Now, we're going to get ready to delve into the toolkit a bit more. We're going to be using Mentimeter for the rest of the webinar, so please grab your phone or open your browser on your laptop so you can participate in this interactive component. You will go to www.mentee.com. You can see the link on the screen here, and it will also be shared in the chat. And then you can enter the code 5007827, which is also shown on the slide, and we'll present it in the upcoming steps. You can get yourself logged in now, and I will let you know when the questions will be coming your way. So today we are going to focus on one specific entry point in the NAP process, namely step B2 in the NAP technical guidelines, which focuses on assessing vulnerabilities and identifying adaptation options. To take a gender responsive approach to this step, we need to analyze and address gender differences in adaptation needs and capacities. This is a critical step for applying a gender lens because people's vulnerabilities and their adaptation needs differ depending on their gender, as well as other factors such as age, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. We know that there are also gender-specific capacities related to adaptation. And finally, a gender-responsive approach recognizes the particular barriers that may be faced, most often by women and non-binary people, due to perceptions, roles, social norms, or cultural practices related to gender. We're going to break this entry point into two parts and explore the different actions that can be taken to adopt a gender responsive approach. So let's start with assessing vulnerabilities. I want you to imagine that your government is planning a national level vulnerability assessment process. They have identified priority sectors that will be assessed and have developed a methodology for evaluating risk in these sectors. They have realized that they should also apply a gender lens in undertaking these assessments, but they're not sure how to proceed. They're looking for recommendations on what they should do to ensure that the vulnerability assessment process is gender responsive. So what does the toolkit recommend for this entry point? There are a number of different actions identified, but we've narrowed these down to 3 for the purposes of this exercise. The first is undertaking a gender analysis to identify gender-specific vulnerabilities. The second is engaging stakeholders in the vulnerability assessment process. The third is involving gender experts to support the application of a gender lens to the process. So now we're going to go to the Mentimeter, and you'll have the chance to vote on what you think your government should do. So we have a lot of votes for gender analysis. I'm going to give it another minute because we have quite a lot of people on the line, so I want to get as many responses as possible. Seems gender analysis is the clear front runner. I'll just give it 15 more seconds to see if a few more responses come in. All right, so it looks like we're going with gender analysis. So we'll just click on that action and see where that takes us. So a gender analysis is really an essential step as it creates the foundation for a gender responsive approach. This can be a standalone exercise designed to understand gender specific vulnerabilities, or it could involve applying a gender lens to a vulnerability assessment, for example, for a specific sector such as health. In either case, the analysis is designed to explore differences between and among different genders. It aims to understand, for example, gender-based roles and activities, relationships, and power dynamics, as well as specific barriers that result from gender inequalities. It looks at how all of these factors influence vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. We have an example in Ethiopia where the government conducted a gender analysis to inform the implementation of the NAP. The analysis highlighted a range of gender issues, including the fact that women are typically employed in the informal, often unpaid sectors of society. It also noted that women and men tend to play different roles in key sectors such as agriculture, where men tend to be responsible for livestock and commercial crops, while women are more typically engaged in cultivating subsistence crops. This means that women and men have different vulnerabilities to climate extremes such as droughts, and therefore their adaptation needs are different. The gender analysis led to recommendations for implementing adaptation options that recognize these differences in vulnerability. For example, to invest in women's economic empowerment and enhancing access for women and marginalized people to education and training opportunities related to employment and business development. And it's important to note that in this case, the three actions that we voted on are very much interlinked. A gender analysis should be undertaken with inputs from both stakeholders and gender experts. So identifying this as the priority action will no doubt lead to progress on the other two. Now we're going to move on to the next step. The national level vulnerability assessment has been completed. It highlighted a number of gender-related factors that influence people's vulnerability to climate change. Now, your government is trying to identify adaptation options to address the identified vulnerabilities in key sectors. They are trying to build on the vulnerability assessment process by taking a gender responsive approach to this step, and they're trying to work out how to do this. So what does the toolkit recommend? Again, we have three options to choose from. Enhancing stakeholder capacity to engage in the identification of adaptation options, identifying and addressing gender-specific barriers to participation in adaptation actions, and third, identifying targeted adaptation options for people of different genders. We'll go back to the Mentimeter so you can vote on what you think your government should do. Okay, I think we have critical mass around addressing barriers to participation. So, when identifying adaptation options in a gender responsive manner, it's important to consider gender specific barriers that may inhibit people's participation in adaptation actions. For example, there are practical issues such as literacy, mobility within communities, and the unpaid care burden, which may affect the opportunities women have to engage in climate action. We also see issues around access to and control over resources, decision-making power, and issues related to inequalities in rights and opportunities. All of these factors may mean that some people, most often women or non-binary people, may be less able to engage in and benefit from adaptation actions. We have an example here from Benin, where the government conducted a gender analysis to inform the NAP process. The analysis provided specific recommendations for actions to address gender issues which create barriers to adaptation. In the water sector, for example, it was recommended to institute quotas to ensure equitable representation of women and men in community water management committees, and to promote technologies that provide labor savings, thereby freeing up some of the women's time, which is currently spent fetching water. These are very practical approaches which can help to lift some of the barriers that women in this context face to participating in adaptation actions. And as in the first example, there are strong linkages between the three potential actions that we voted on here. Capacity and opportunities to engage with decision-making processes is often one of the barriers identified. So efforts to build such capacities can also contribute to removing these barriers. And that ends our exploration of the toolkit for today. I would encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. It's available on the NAP Global Network website, as well as on the UNFCCC website, along with the other supplementary materials to the technical guidelines for the NAP process. And back over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Angie. We're going to ask you now to stay in Mentimeter because we still like to hear from you, and we're going to use the same tool, same code as you have in the screen there, and you'll see actually you already see the question there on the screen. What will you do next to help make your country's NAP process more gender responsive? So maybe you could take some inspiration from what Angie has said, from what you heard in the video as well, or just from your own experiences, and tell us here in a short sentence, couple of sentences, what that step might be in your case, in your own country, to make the NAP process more gender responsive. So I'll give you some time, take a minute to think it through, and when you're ready, send it over, and then we'll give you, some of you, whoever would like to, the opportunity to tell us a little bit more about what they wrote. But I'll be quiet for a while to give you time to think and write your answer. Okay, I'm going to start reading also so they don't go all the way up. I'm gonna read a couple of them, and then I'm starting to see, for example, someone writing about actually writing a letter to the local government to express what they would like. So connect, let's say, more local level to higher levels of governance, putting gender at the center, work on capacity building, understand the different impacts for men and women, conduct gender analysis, open up to stakeholders who have not been. So really all are brilliant ideas. I'd like to go, first of all, to one of our participants, Brigitte Badi from Cote d'Ivoire, who's a gender expert in the NAP team in her country. And Brigitte, would you like to share up in the with your microphone, with your own voice, tell us a little bit more about what you said? And I believe Brigitte will speak in French, but then I will provide a translation.
Oui, justement. Bonjour à tout le monde. Je vais m'exprimer en français. Alors, la Côte d'Ivoire, qui a déjà élaboré ses guides, aura à procéder à l'évaluation des vulnérabilités au niveau de 5 secteurs prioritaires. Il s'agit de l'agriculture, l'eau, l'érosion côtière, l'utilisation des terres et la santé. Alors, pour pouvoir intégrer et prendre en compte la question de genre, pour nous, nous devons procéder au renforcement des capacités des différents acteurs. Il s'agit des acteurs techniques, des ministères techniques, et puis au niveau des cadres institutionnels. Et lorsqu'on aura franchi cette étape pour permettre aux gens de prendre en compte la question du genre, aussi bien dans les évaluations que dans le rendu des évaluations, nous aurons à élaborer des documents de communication pour que l'information arrive effectivement de façon équitable au niveau des hommes et des femmes. Voilà ce que je peux dire en ce moment. Merci.
Merci à vous, Brigitte. I will give a translation of what Brigitte just mentioned. So she said that the Ivory Coast will undertake 5 sectoral vulnerability assessments for 5 priority sectors: agriculture, water, coastal erosion, land use, and health. Based on these vulnerability assessments, they will produce a report that identifies gender-specific vulnerabilities to climate change in the 5 priority sectors. In order to ensure that gender becomes a cross-cutting issue, capacity building and coaching activities will be developed for the different national actors and institutional frameworks. Efforts will also be made to communicate the different results. So merci, Brigitte, for that input. I would like now to encourage everyone who would like to speak up to raise your hand. If you double click on participation or an option to raise your hand. So please do that if you'd like to speak. I know we have now Sandra Kese Amankwa. Also, Sandra, you have raised your hand. So over to you to share your thoughts. You are on mute still. Feel free to not only unmute yourself, but if you'd like, also put your camera on as you prefer. Sandra, you remain still on mute. Hopefully, let's see if you can sort that out. If not, let me go, while you sort that out, Sandra, let me go to Adolphus Ifeka. Adolphus, over to you, please. Tell us a little bit more about what you wrote.
Thank you, Daniel, for the opportunity. It's been a nice one, but I listened to my friend from Togo and Ghana, how they share the experience on NAP and gender equality. And I was surprised that Nigeria has no representation. So I want to know, I've already Nigeria have no representation on NAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Adolphus. Thank you very much for that. We took note of your question, and I think unless my colleague Angie would like to come in now with specific details about the case of Nigeria, I think maybe that's something that we can take offline with you, if that's okay.
Okay.
To look in detail of that case. Thanks, Adolphus, for your participation. Can I go back to you, Sandra? Have you managed to sort the mute issue? Unfortunately not. Sandra, if you'd like to write that on the Q&A, we'll keep an eye on that and try to respond to you. Yeah. Meanwhile, let me give the word, please, to Hassan Yassin.
Daniel, sorry, Daniel, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
now we can hear you.
It's me, MP. It's me, MP.
Oh, Antwi. Okay, Antwi, over to you. Now we can hear you crystal clear, and then we'll go to Hassan Yassin.
Yeah,
over
so
to you,
I have a question that goes to Angie. I don't know whether I can still ask that question because when she was taking us through the Mentimeter, I had 2 questions that I want to quickly ask. Is this still
okay? Well,
allowed?
let's give it a quick go at that, and then still,
okay,
we'd like to use the space mostly to share on the question that we've asked you. But okay, go
but
ahead.
I have a very quick question, if she can, regarding the vote. If you want to use the tool and do the voting, who are supposed to be the ones who do the voting in country? Because this one we have quite a number of participants, so we can get the vote quickly coming in. In country practical assessment, who will do the voting? Who do the voting? That's the first thing. Right. The second question has to do with time series. Yeah.
Okay, Angie, would you like to come in on Antwi's question?
Well, I think it comes down to engaging with your key stakeholders in the NAP process and also with the various gender actors in the country to really map out what are the next steps that Ghana needs to take. And I think you guys have already put quite a lot of thought into this, and you have a gender expert on the team. And I think that will really help you to figure out, what are the most important next steps that you can take to move this gender responsive approach to the NAP process forward. And I think, you know, in that case, when you've identified which next steps you want to take, then the toolkit is there to sort of provide you with further guidance and resources that you can use to do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Angie.
Antwi, can you tell us your next step though, before we let you go?
So my next step for this project is actually, I wrote it down there because I need to engage further with other stakeholders to be able to also understand how this very important toolkit works, and then we can all use it together as various sectors.
Fantastic. Thanks, Antwi. Thanks very much for that. Hassan, would you like to come in? I don't see your hand up, but you had it before. And meanwhile, while you come in, Hassan, let me encourage everyone to also feel free to raise your hand and share your answer in more detail. Over to you, Hassan.
Thank you for welcoming me. Please, I'm happy to be part of this. My first time that I took on NAP course was back on 2017 from UNITA. And from since therefore, I started advocating for national adaptation programs. So the question which here was raised, what I mentioned was putting gender at the center when we are preparing for the national adaptation planning process, because climate change affects most vulnerable in the community, and the most vulnerable community in Somalia, where I'm from, is majorly women and children. So, and they are affected, and we are seen as scientifically in Somalia. So I urge my government to put women and children on the center in the NAP adaptation planning process. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Really appreciate it. Can I, now that I have you here, in Somalia, what would you say putting gender at the center would translate to? If you'd like to share a little bit more on your initial ideas, what would that look like? Is it about policies? Is it about specific actions at community level? Do you have any initial thought on that?
Yeah, well, to put in the center the women is in the policy process, from the policy process to implementation programs. Because for now, in the country, when it comes to the policy, where majorly the parliament, most of women are less, they are just less than that percentage, although now they are approving. The other problem in addressing with this national adaptation plan is so far now we don't have a ministry that addresses directly to climate change and environmental programs. But what we have is under the office prime minister, which goes this one. And for that under office the prime minister, mostly the executive directors of this program are majorly male. There are no women representing in that policy process. So that's what we contact them and urge them to put more specifically on female, so that they can address their own issues.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Hassan. That's really important, that the issue of representation, right? Having also a perspective of women in the process, institutions, strengthen the existence of institutions that deal with these aspects. So thanks very much for your input. I will give another word to Estefania. Estefania, over to you to share your example, and then Justine.
Hi, good morning. My name is Stephanie. I'm talking from Colombia. For answer the question, I just would like to say I'm working in academia sector, and we're trying to encourage the state to include a gender perspective and human rights view from the NAP process. However, this is quite complicated because the government has opened to everyone like the first document, the first NAP process, and there is nothing about gender equality or gender perspective. So we're trying to rewrite the document, but I think I think the recognized gender equality is the first step, but I think sometimes it's not enough. I think we need to really identify the responsibilities, the stakeholders, and also make all the analysis gender, including experts gender and everything. So yeah, thanks for this space. I think the guide will really help us, and we're hoping to have good results.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephanie. I think you raised a very important point. And I think also in the context, in between the lines, also what you're saying is that important relationship between academia, between research and decision makers, and help understand what the key issues are and how to address them. So I think that collaboration is also incredibly important to a NAP process.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Justine, you had raised your hand before. Justine Fuentes, I believe. Yes, there you are. So over to you, Justine. Could you, if you could introduce yourself and where you're coming from, and please share your answer to the question.
Hello, good evening. I'm speaking from the Philippines. So just to introduce a small background about the Philippines, the Philippines is experiencing a lot of troubles, especially the pandemic right now, not only with the health crisis and also the economic crisis that we are facing, but also I think that the representation of female and youth is really underrepresented in the government sector. We are barely heard. Our suggestions are not always, but most of the time disregarded by this public servants. And I would just like to ask if there is some way or something that a solution that we can adapt here in the Philippines that had been effective for the other countries, so that we can also explore on how we can make our country process more gender responsive. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. I think that's a really good segue to you, Angie, to maybe, I wonder if you could share some of those stories, some of good practices in gender analysis or in the whole process overall.
Sure, thank you for the question. So as part of the toolkit, we tried to include for each of the different steps that we talked about and the different enabling activities that we talked about, we included a country example to really put the guidance into context and provide some, practice examples to show countries who are looking to apply the toolkit, how other countries have done this in practice. So that's one source of inspiration. And we also had a question about good practices or successful experiences with gender analysis for the NAP process. And I wanted to mention that, a number of countries now have undertaken such analyses, some with support of the NAP Global Network and others working with other partners or taking the initiative on their own. And I think this is really generating some interesting lessons about how important these processes are in sort of creating that foundation for a gender responsive approach. And we had actually published a briefing note where we reflected on the gender analyses that were undertaken in 6 African countries, and we share some lessons that we learned through those processes. And just to share a couple of the lessons, I think one is really that the relevance of the process is strongly dependent, of the analysis, is strongly dependent on the process. So you really need to tailor the process to the country and where in the NAP process the country is, and what will be most useful to inform decision-making in the next steps. And I think the other one that I just wanted to say is that it doesn't have to be a very complicated process to provide useful recommendations. So I think that investing in whatever is possible in terms of gender analysis for a country at a particular time will always be useful. So I will stop there and I'll share the link to that briefing note in the chat.
So much, Angie. Well, I welcome, we still have some more minutes to continue this discussion. So I really welcome you to share any ideas by raising your hand, then I can give you the floor. But meanwhile, just while you get excited to do that, I'll just share a few things that I've been seeing in the questions. There's a lot about capacity building, undertaking capacity building, being quite important. And here I'd love to hear from anyone who has talked about that. Anything a bit more in detail of what type of capacity building, because who needs to build their capacity, who should be building their capacity, what kind of skills. So if you would like to have if you have a particular thought on that, very welcome to come in. Also, you're welcome to come in if you have other things that you'd like to share. There's been a number of comments also about opening up to other stakeholders, like the others who are not normally part of this whole process. And I think that's also incredibly important. So this whole process of participation that we were talking about as important principles of doing a gender responsive NAP process. And, and also again, coming back to you, if you could share a little more detail of what that means in your particular country, that would be great. What barriers exist at the moment, what opportunities exist, what other stakeholders are not being included. So it would be super interesting to hear that. And a third and final one for now is the role of men and women and how this in some places is very fixed roles. How one of the barriers seems to be that because these roles are so fixed, then there is no gender to come out of just being a discussion about women and girls. And what is important, I think, is to make that discussion about gender dynamics, relationship between the different genders. And therefore, as many have said here as well, bring men into the discussion. They are an important part of the discussion. They should be part of the way forward as well. I don't see any hands yet, but you're still very welcome. And if you don't find that, oh, there's one. Aisha Constable. Aisha, good to see you, and over to you. Aisha, you're still on mute.
Hello.
There you are.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Everyone, Aisha Constable, NAP project coordinator in Antigua and Barbuda. I'm glad that Angie mentioned the need to tailor the plans and the guidelines, because I think as much as the guidelines are here as a blueprint, it's very important that we do not take them wholesale and try to fit it to our context. It's very important that the cultural nuances, the contextual realities of each space are used to inform that approach. I know that, we're all as countries at different starting points on the matter of gender equality. I think we can all say that there is an unlevel playing field, so to speak, so much so that men usually have greater favor in certain respects. But I know that in the context of Caribbean countries, there is a perception that the gap between men and women is not as great as in some other parts of the world. Needless to say, with those considerations, it still demands that an analysis of what those realities are on the ground be done, so that the integration of the realities of women and men continue to inform in a real way, and not just in a way where we're trying to meet, a checklist of things that a donor or someone else is trying to get us to flag. So just reiterating that point of needing to ensure that the realities, the cultural perceptions, beliefs, practices on the ground inform in a meaningful way, so that the results of this process are truly meaningful and applicable to our own countries.
Thanks very much, Aisha. Appreciate that. And I think it's a really super important point to recognize that that cultural element. I recognize how institutions are working, how traditions also are shaping the whole process, and what can be done to all of these different formal, more informal institutions to really push a gender responsive response and a strategy and an action plan. I don't see any further hands. I think it's also maybe a good time to start wrapping it up. If you have a burning question or comment, please still do it in the next few seconds, and I'll give you the opportunity. But thanks so much for your very important, very meaningful comments. We will try to information with you. Hopefully, I have to check with my colleagues if we can do this technically, but hopefully even these comments share with you in our website at the end of the week. Thank you very much for your kind and insightful participation. Okay, we'd now like to move to our closing remarks, and I'd like to invite Ms. Funanani Muremi of South Africa from the Adaptation Committee under the UNFCCC to offer closing remarks. Ms. Funanani, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you very much for this engaging webinar, not only on behalf of the Adaptation Committee, but for everyone who is involved in this work. As previous speakers have said, that the UNFCCC decision calls for climate actions to be gender responsive. And then I think Angie also clarified that the tool provide further guidance in relation to adaptation planning. I therefore see that the tool provide a big value for adaptation planners on the ground, as well as those at national level and international organizations. We will also draw on it in the further work of our constituted bodies under the UNFCCC. And then moving forward, we're thinking about how we can better coordinate with other constituted bodies under the UNFCCC on what can be done to enhance the engagement with other stakeholders to ensure that adaptation decision-making addresses gender inequalities and works towards reducing such inequalities. With that said, I therefore look forward to organizing together with all the contributors of this event. And once the pandemic is over, a joint event on gender at the next NAP Expo in Botswana next year, which we can hopefully already share the lessons that we have learned in applying this toolkit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Funanani, and I think we'll all be very much looking forward to that. I think we all need a conference soon enough, isn't it? Right, so thanks again, everyone, for your participation. Before closing, I would like to highlight an opportunity for countries to access technical assistance for their NAP processes. And there's been a couple of questions and comments about that. So I think it's timely to say so. The NAP Global Network's Country Support Hub, we call it Country Support Hub, provides inputs to maintain momentum and increase effectiveness in NAP processes. These are short-term requests that normally last 6 months, sometimes less. And examples of past requests have included, for example, developing gender analysis, communication strategies, NAP roadmaps, so things like we have been talking about here. We have been responding to requests for support from 26 countries already. And at the moment, we are accepting applications for support on an ongoing basis. So not just at the moment, but we're always trying to find opportunities to implement them. So if you're a government actor or stakeholder involved in your country's NAP process, and you would like to access technical support to advance your NAP process, and particularly if you'd like support to make the process more gender responsive, of course, we would warmly welcome you to please get in touch with us via the email address that is on the screen right there. So send us an email and we'd love to carry that further with you and discuss the details and take it forward. Right, so without further ado, just thank you very much to the LEG, the Adaptation Committee, the UNFCCC Secretariat for collaborating with us in this initiative, in this webinar. We've recorded this webinar and it will be posted, as I've mentioned a few times, on our website, the NAP Global Network, along with the PowerPoint presentation you've just seen. Before we close, we would invite you to join the NAP Global Network by registering on our website at napglobalnetwork.org. This is free, open to everyone, and can be done on an individual basis, so not as an institution necessarily. By joining, we'll be sure to keep you up to date on future webinars, publications, knowledge products, as well as NAP-related news more broadly. Please don't hesitate to be in touch with us if you have questions or are interested in learning more about how you can get involved in the work that we're doing, how we can support you as well. Thank you very much to you all for joining us today. Sincere thanks to the UNFCCC Adaptation Committee, the Least Developed Countries Expert Group for your collaboration on the toolkit and on today's webinar. Thank you again. Have a great day, have a great evening, and hope to see you soon. Bye now.